Hello and welcome to the 10th Revolution Group Tech Success Podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with industry-leading tech professionals and ED&I experts. My name is Katherine Lord, and today I'm joined by Bridge of Hope, James and Chance. A warm welcome to you both. Would you like to let our listeners know a little bit about your kind of journey and setting up Bridge of Hope? So James.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for having us on your podcast. We're super excited to be here. So a little bit about the sort of backstory to Bridge of Hope, and then kind of we can explain a little bit further down the line how it works. So the backstory is I was born white, male, and very privileged. In fact, I had a very large silver spoon in my mouth. So large that age 13, I was sent away to the world's most famous boarding school. Yep, you got it. I was in the same class as a boy called Cameron, who went on to run the country, and 2 years below a buffoon called Johnson, who ran the country into the ground. So I had all the privilege you could dream of. I then spent 2.5 decades in the drinks industry, peddling legal drugs for Johnny Walker, Guinness, companies like and Diageo, Bass, etc., etc. So I loved that. It was great. Got moved to America with my young family, and by 2008, I was running many of the biggest customers in North America. Happily married, 3 kids, big swimming pool. What could go wrong? Well, pretty well everything. And having been possibly the luckiest person in the universe, my luck deserted me spectacularly. And I was made redundant 5 times in 6 years. I was swindled twice, all my money taken away. I was sued, my business taken away, and everything unraveled. So I ended up in a psychiatric ward just outside New York. All a bit rubbish. Came back to the UK, and there I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At the time, I didn't know what it was. Then I very slowly accepted it. Now I realize it's actually my superpower. But over the next 6 or 7 weeks, my entire Maslow's pyramid just disintegrated. My marriage went, my kids went, my corporate career went, and everything I had apart from a suitcase went, which was all a bit rubbish, to be honest. But I needed to get a job, and I wasn't allowed to do anything involved using my brain. So I thought I'd get a job in a pub, coffee shop, and none of them would give me a job. And having been white, very privileged, I'd never experienced barriers to employment, but there they were. So anyway, I was a janitor for a year, fortunately, in a frozen meat factory, kind of interesting, while my classmate was prime minister. Clawed my way back to the corporate world, and I got laid up one more time. And that was 7 years ago. And that was the instigation of everything. I had an epiphany moment sitting on a church wall in North London, where somebody up there basically gave me a good kicking and said, "I'm not interested in you peddling drugs. Do something with your life." So I didn't really know what, but I did know, Catherine, and you know this better than anybody. I did know the power of a job and what it does for you, your family, your finances, your self-worth. And the flip side is the utter devastation of unemployment. So I very naively thought, I'm going to try and help people less fortunate than myself get jobs. And so did a bunch of research, found out that charities were really good at getting people back on their feet, but actually didn't then do anything about getting them to work. And so as a bipolar person, I see opportunity everywhere I go, and I'm like, what a talent pool. All these people who are ready to go, they just need access. And even 7 years ago, large organizations were wanted to be more diverse, wanted to be more inclusive, but didn't know where to find people. So that was the genesis of Bridge of Hope. We were a small charity for 2 years doing inclusive hiring. And then with the pandemic, which was fun, as you can imagine, we shifted. We became a social enterprise, and we said, right, we're going to be fully digital, and we're going to help people from charities, from boot camps, from non-Russell unis, and people who come from underrepresented groups, and we'll put them into any type of job. We just want to provide that access. And the hope was by now we'd have 1,500 candidates. Currently, we have 86,000 overlooked candidates on our books, and we work with about 66 or so multinational blue chip clients, and we're just the connective tissue. So that's the journey. I'm now going to hand you over to Chance, who's going to tell you his story as a graduate of our program, a superstar graduate of our program. And health warning, gird your loins. It's a hell of a story.
Okay. And I know that you probably weren't born quite as lucky. Tell us about some of the challenges you faced and how you've overcame them.
Yeah, I didn't get to go to a fancy school or anything like that in my life. It was terrible. In fact, I was unfortunately born into a family where my dad didn't think I was his, and so I experienced huge amounts of physical abuse. And The first being before I was even 1 year old. And that left me with what I thought were birthmarks until I was 21. So I didn't feel significant at home. And I ran away a lot, met some friends. They made me feel good. They made me feel significant. But the byproduct of that was they were from the antisocial membership. So it was only going to be a matter of time before I got into trouble. And I did. Right. So by the time I was 16, I ended up in prison. By the time I was 18, my sister took me to a mental hospital because the childhood trauma and depression had seriously taken its toll by then. And then I tried to make some changes to my life, not too much success. And fast forward, my sister, who was my absolute rock, my only rock at times, she died. She died of cancer, young. And I didn't want to talk about it because then that would make it real, which is the worst thing you could do, because within a year, my life completely unraveled, completely fell apart. And I ended up back inside one last time. But this time I asked myself this question. I said, do you like who you are? And the answer was a solid no. In fact, I thought if this was going to be my existence for my entire future, I didn't see the point in having a life. I really didn't. And I just wanted it all to end. So I was left with these choices to literally either jump off a cliff or change. And so I threw everything in the kitchen sink and the neighbor's kitchen sink at change, and spent 3 years and 10 months in therapy almost every day to unlock some pain, while spending 5 years studying with the Open University to give myself an education my childhood did not afford unto me, and done swaves of personal development programs. And then this incredible day came upon me where I was just filled with ebullience, and the warm tears of joy came flooding down my face. And it was because for the first time in my entire life, I felt freedom. No more emotional discombobulation, no more anger. I was filled with forgiveness and topped to the brim with self-respect, and realized my childhood experiences were no longer going to define my future, and that I'd finally become the person I was always meant to be. And that was the day I decided, whatever work I'm doing, it must be about changing lives, nourishing communities, and making a real difference. And all roads had led to me meeting James Fellows here. And we became friends for 1.5 years, and everyone should know we are still friends. And he said, come over to Bridge of Hope. I finally came across, and my God, for me, it was like an invitation to heaven, because I was successfully transforming the lives of young men who'd come into contact with the criminal justice system. But now I can support everyone, from veterans to people who are neurodiverse like myself, and people with different abilities. I prefer the term than disabilities. And so here we are, driven with all that passion and lived experience out there to really not just change lives with inclusive recruitment, but also help employers to understand the qualities and skills such candidates bring to the table.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's quite a comeback as well from what you've experienced in your childhood. So well done you for moving beyond it. So back to kind of James, why should employers actively seek to hire for grit and recruit for resilience? Any best practice employers spring to mind?
Yeah, so a great question. First of all, answering the first piece. So, until 3 or 4 months ago, we were focusing on inclusive hiring. And there's an awful lot of research about inclusive hiring and all the benefits. And then you and your listeners may have heard there's been a bit of noise across the pond. And when we saw there was a plane crash in DC, and within 20 minutes the blame was put on inclusive hiring, we're like, okay, Houston, we have a problem.
Yes.
So we are far from walking away from it, but we also thought maybe we just need to rethink about the positioning. And so we've been talking for some time about grit and resilience, and suddenly this is like, hold on a second, this is the central tenet to everything we do. And there's been some great research by a lady called Angela Duckworth. Now, she was originally a McKinsey consultant, then she became a schoolmaster, she became a teacher in a school in inner city Philly, and couldn't understand why the really bright kids didn't go on to do particularly well, and the less bright kids often went flying forward. So she left teaching, became a researcher. She spent 15 years researching one question: what made people successful in their careers? And she did all this kind of research and came back and said it wasn't IQ, it wasn't your background, it wasn't your track record, it was grit. It was grit or resilience and perseverance, and the ability to get up when you're pushed down, etc., etc. And obviously, when you think about our underrepresented groups, by implication, they all have grit in spades, whether you've been in prison or homeless or you're neurodiverse and you've had to navigate through that system. So And this group, we know, proven to work harder, stay longer, and they come with that grit and resilience. That's all important, and that will drive your retention as well. Which I know every organization at the moment is focused about retention. We'll go hire people who are more likely to stay.
Yes.
Second part you said about, is there a best practice? Well, there are a lot, but I'm going to choose one which I love, which is actually one of the companies I met very, very early on. And they were a recycling company, but believe it or not, up in the Northwest, Preston Way. And they did a bunch of recycling, and they had a foundation that put people into work. And I was told, look, these guys are best in class. So I went to talk to them, found out they had this brilliant program, and they kind of basically helped anybody locally who was homeless and got them back on their feet. And then at the end of a program, put them into work. So I loved it. And not all of it was with their own recycling company. But I said to the CEO, what were the big benefits of this? And he said, oh, well, there are three. He said, in third place was they worked much harder. And he said, well, actually, it wasn't just them. Everybody around them worked harder because they were working so hard. Everybody else raised their game as well. He said, secondly, we don't have a word called retention in our business because it's acted like a glue. And I'm like, wow, how the hell do you top that? And he goes, well, actually, the number one benefit is we pretty well never lose a bid. He said, because every other recycling company will be quoting in pounds per ton, and we just say, look, if you do this, we'll put 8 homeless people into work, and if you do that, we'll put 10. And he said, by implication, pretty well every time we win, and we're still more expensive. So that for me is the dream. Coming out of the corporate world is actually, this is something where you can really make a difference, do good, but it's commercially very savvy as well.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, amazing. Do you know what? I worked in the Salesforce CRM recruitment area for a year, and I ran the division there. And actually, one of the things that they do is they invest a lot in ED&I, but also sustainability. So there's an awful lot of trees planted off the back of, maybe hiring or whatever it might be. So yeah, if there's a direct link, it incentivizes, doesn't it? Good practice.
Absolutely.
So no, I totally get it. And Chance, tell us about Bridge of Hope's unique talent pool. Where do you source your talent from? And how is Bridge of Hope kind of careers different to other diverse job boards?
Well, we have an open space to anyone who is system impacted. So, of course, people can walk in, identify as marginalised or have a protected characteristics. Absolutely welcome. We're all about inclusion. But we also have our candidates fed in from 105 charities over the years, and 25 non-Russell Group universities as well. So lots of first in family grads, etc., right the way through. And I don't want my personal journey, my personal story to take the spotlight off of all the other talent pools, your veterans, your neurodiverse, your disabled, etc. And so they all come in, and we have a real understanding of what it's like to be system impacted. And so our support systems that we have in place take into consideration things that others may not consider. For instance, we signpost any of our candidates who have family financial troubles. We signpost them to a great organization who doesn't just help the candidate. This support is extended to the whole family. And it's simply because if you're the only one in your family that's landed that good job or first in family grad, it's not just your degree. The whole family just got a degree. The whole family just got a job. And so everyone's banked their hopes in one person. And that can be a real pressure, albeit a privilege. And so this is in place so candidates can actually say, look, to cousin such and such, I'll support you. I'll introduce you to some professionals. They will support that family member, taking the pressure from the candidate, but also giving them a feeling that they're not alone in that space. We do the same for, helping candidates to access wages before payday, things like that, things that will reduce the anxiety for any candidate going into that first month of employment.
Yep. Brilliant. You're game changing, aren't you? And James, I know, how does Bridge of Hope help corporates, drive social value and meet the needs of the new Procurement Act? I know there was also another thing that I was thinking about within financial services. For example, if someone had been in prison, how do you get through those kind of barriers? Because that's tricky from a compliance perspective. So hopefully you can answer all of those things at once.
Yeah, I might defer to the last one to Chance. He's better at answering that one. So when it
Brilliant.
comes to social value, this is the S of ESG. Now, pretty well, all of your listeners will be, if you're working for a mid to large organization, ESG will still play a very big part. And they're getting a lot of pressure from whether it's a private equity company backing them or pensions, et cetera, to drive ESG. Now, we don't even know how to spell the E of ESG, the environment piece, and governance is basically something you better do, otherwise you're going to end up in prison. But the S is where the opportunity area is. And we looked at this from an inclusive hiring point of view, and we started going, okay, so how does it compare to other ways of driving social value? The answer is it just blows them away. And doesn't really matter what other metric you're looking about. So sort of volunteering, you might get £700 or £800 of social value, or half a day training, you might be getting £300 or £400. But putting one person from an underrepresented group into work, £20,000. £20,000. And if they've been in prison, Chance, what are you talking about?
It's around £55,000 if they've been in prison. If they've been in the care system, you can add 15,000 on top of that.
So this is a perfect way to say, yeah, okay, how do we expand our talent pool? How do we become more inclusive? But also to be able to feed up to your CFO and say, guess what? We managed to drive, £150,000 worth of social value, which is going to help them enormously. Because where it's going to help is with bids and tenders. So if any organizations out there, particularly if they're doing bids to the public sector, but it doesn't need to be that. I mean, also, we know from a lot of private sectors as well, social value will play a big part. So in the public sector, minimum 10% can be up to 20%. So, if you're building bridges or big projects, et cetera, these organizations are expert in what they do. But 20% of that decision is going to be based on what are you doing to help the local community, to drive social value, et cetera, put more inclusive hiring in the area. And that's where we have our social value accelerator, which is a whole framework to say, right, how can we help you turbocharge your social value to win more bids, change hearts and minds, and actually do the activation as well. And then I'll defer to Chance just on the returning citizen piece.
Yeah, it's how do you get them out? I mean, how do you get these candidates? How do you attract them? First of all, I'd urge everyone to look at who's winning in this space. You've got Timpson's, Virgin, Molson Coors, Johnson's Hotel Linen. They've been hiring from this group for years, and they haven't stopped. The fact that they haven't stopped should tell the world that this is working. And one of the important things for employers to understand that this is life-changing for the individual. They were in the space they were in most of the time through not being able to find any other way of earning money to feed the family, et cetera, so once they do have a job, people's wondering, why don't they steal and why do they stay? Well, Timpson's was asked the question, is there any theft? He said, absolutely. He said, but never from this group. So that's one of the important things that employers need to do is actually, get past that barrier themselves in their own minds and say, okay, if it's working for Virgin, Timpson's, Molson, all these other organizations, shouldn't I step in, have a look? And we can help with things like that. We're actually going to be bringing lots of executives inside Brixton Prison, where they'll have an immersive masterclass, an immersive workshop, where they'll be dine in a almost Michelin star style restaurant, which is inside the prison, called the Clink. And I urge everyone to look it up. It's a fantastic place to dine, but a great way to really immerse yourselves in that space. And once you've gone through that, you'll realize that they don't have two heads and a tail, and they're absolutely fantastic candidates. And it is true, there is a reason why they don't go back to the life they were in once in employment. And this is the way in, really. And we're open, if anyone's listening in, we're open to talking to them about how we can get them to have that workshop inside the prison. And so, give us a shout on that. Absolutely open to that. Because I just want to shift many hearts and minds in that space as possible.
And it's all about having the testimonials, isn't it? I think most of the corporates, the only thing they'll ever feel concerned about is that trust. And that's shifting their mindset, isn't it, really?
And we do a lot to help shift mindsets. It's the hiring manager where actually it falls down a lot of the time. It's either the very top with the exec who are kind of stuck in the mud and the hiring manager in the middle, no problem. And so we do a lot of focus around, we have a mindset makeover to really change that mindset of the hiring manager so they see the opportunity and make it nice and easy. But just building on what Chance said, I know we're getting to the end, is just to say to your listeners, if this has resonated in any way, two things, one of which it's very difficult to translate. So we appreciate that if you go back and tell your board or whatever and think this is a good idea, it probably will fall flat in the face. So use us. We're offering, we do lunch and learns, absolutely zero cost. We are here to try and change hearts and minds. Our mission is to make inclusive hiring the normal. So if you'd like us to come and do a lunch and learn, online lunch and learn to your management team or your team, that's an absolute open offer. And if you'd be kind enough to put our kind of LinkedIn on the podcast so that they can DM. But thank you.
We definitely will. And I know Chance was just going to give a little bit more kind of first-hand sort of perspective on the talent pool, the grit, the resilience. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Chance?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, grit, like James said, it's the number one predictor of success. Resilience, emotional intelligence, the ability to improvise in tough situations, and my favorite, perseverance. And these are the characteristics left with our system impacted candidates. And what's really beautiful about focusing on the characteristics of the individual, not the individual itself, it makes it 100% inclusive. So it doesn't matter if you're black, white, male, female, gay, straight, or anything in between. You either have got grit or you don't have grit. And we want hiring managers to actually look at these predictors of success. They have been proven with over decades of research that these characteristics outweigh IQ. So this is something that we really need to look at here. So if you're looking for candidates who have resilience, grit, particularly perseverance, and if you're hiring for perseverance, you're essentially hiring for better retention.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It's a little bit like recruitment. There isn't always a kind of, I suppose, a bar or a barrier to entry. And often the people that work most effectively within recruitment are those that see long-term partnerships, not short-term cash, and have an incredibly good work ethic and do the right thing. It's like, it's those people that think they're going to get a quick gain from it. Just never works out for them very well. Talking from an expert that's been in it 25 years.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Can I make a final suggestion? Perhaps Chance could just share one tiny story about his son, because it's a great way to end a podcast like this. It's
Amazing.
a very powerful
Thank you.
Statement to finish up with.
Yeah. I will. This was powerful, and this is where I want people to think so much more deeper about, hiring from different system impacted groups. My son, whether I was good or bad in my life, he always came up to me. He said, "Dad, I love you," and it's always beautiful to hear that. Always beautiful. But one day, with all the changes that I made in my life, he came up to me and he said, "Dad, I love who you are," and that moved me. It moved me to tears. In fact, I thought about all the other families from disadvantaged backgrounds. I thought, of course, the children love them, but do they love who they are? Because it's when they love who they are, that's when inspiration strikes in the household and ricochets out as a positive light in our communities. My son said, "I want to do what you did. I want to help people." And he landed himself a role as a teacher's assistant, left that, went on to do some other projects, all helping other people. So this has a massive impact. So my big ask today is, when you are hiring, particularly from system impacted groups, think about the positive impact it will have in that household. And if you have children, you want them inspired.
Amazing. Wow. Good story to finish with. Thank you for joining me today. And I hope the listeners have got lots from it. All right. Brilliant. See you again soon.
Yes.
Thank you, Katherine.
Cheers. Thanks for having us.